Tim, while we're talking about the ECB that potentially could be taking action on this front, potentially could be hiking rates by the end of the year, one central bank that was not hiking rates today was the Central Bank of Russia, actually delivering a 300 basis point rate cut. What is your reaction to that?
Well, look, I mean, the Russia, the markets have been heavily controlled since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, right? I mean, the ruble's rallied. It's not a meaningful market. There's not much liquidity there. This is a bit of a PR stunt from the CBR, meant to support, the Kremlin in its invasion of Ukraine. Unfortunately, its independence has kind of gone out the window now. But the reality is, the invasion of Ukraine and the sanctions that have been applied on Russia because of that have been devastating. Are going to get worse, I think, because energy supplies, or Russia's ability to supply energy to Europe, is going to diminish over time, whether or not there's an embargo this year or not. Over the medium term, there will be massive restrictions on Russian energy sales, and that's terrible for the Russian economy, right? So Russia will be in recession this year and is going to be stagnated for years to come. So the CBR is thinking about how it's going to support the Russian economy.
Tim, thus far, though, the optics do look more favourable for Russia. As you say, the ruble has round-tripped. They haven't defaulted yet. How sustainable is this? The US Treasury looks like it wants a default.
I don't agree with you. I don't think this looks great for Russia at all, right? I mean, they are being cut off from most trade. Every day, almost, we see more sanctions. This is devastating for the Russian economy. The ruble may rally short term, but try trading it. Try trading the ruble. It's not a market, right? I mean, it's kind of a Potemkin market, essentially, right? So I don't think it's looking good for Russia at all. I mean, it's going into an Iran, North Korea style situation. That's terrible for Russia.
Okay, I guess the point I was trying to make is from a Vladimir Putin point of view, as he tries to talk to his own people, you go to Moscow, on every street corner, the dollar-ruble rate is there, and everybody knows exactly what it is on a day-by-day basis. From that point of view, the optics look fairly favourable. The reality, as you say, underlying that is still significantly more difficult. My question is, how much harder is it going to get, and when is that story and this wave really going to break? The US Treasury clearly wants Russia to default. When is that going to happen?
Well, they probably are already in default already. I mean, the OFZ payments that were due more than 30 days ago were not paid to foreigners. I don't understand why the rating agencies have not already declared that a default. As you mentioned, OFEC clearly have been playing a game of chicken with the Russians. They figured out the Russians do care. They do want to avoid a default, given their actions they've undertaken in recent weeks of trying to make payment. But I think Russia does go into default on external debt when the general license ends on May 27th. And that will be very impactful for a very long time for Russia, right? It's not going to be like 98. In 98, Russia came out of default relatively quickly. It had an IMF program, bondholders, and the IMF wanted to help them come out of restructuring. This time, when the US Treasury wants them to remain in default, it's going to be very hard for bondholders to negotiate with the Ministry of Finance to come out of default. So Russia will be in default for perhaps a decade. It's going to be like Venezuela, right? That means, no access to international capital markets, very high costs of borrowing, even from the Chinese, no investment, no growth, low living standards. It's a terrible outlook for Russia and Russians because of the invasion of Ukraine.
So is essentially what you're saying, Russia is going to be untouchable to an international investor for an indefinite, essentially, amount of time?
Well, even if there's a peace in Ukraine, I think Putin has crossed the Rubicon, with his actions in Ukraine. And I think, from an ESG perspective, companies don't want the kind of bad publicity of doing business with Russia because of Putin. That's the fact.
Given that backdrop, Vladimir Putin probably knows that. What does that mean in terms of his actions elsewhere, particularly on the battlefield in Ukraine? Tim, I remember speaking to you before the invasion happened, and you were pretty adamant that this was the direction of travel. You painted a very bleak picture then. How do you see the picture now?
Well, I think clearly the battle for Donbass is absolutely critical, right? There's going to be, I think, a winner, a defining winner and a defining loser. It's remarkable if you think about it. On February 24th, most analysts were expecting the Ukrainians to lose in a matter of hours, right? The fact that they're still there, they're still fighting, they've pushed the Russians out of the north and around Kiev, and they have a chance in this battle. And I think what's clear is the West has realized that, you know, the Ukrainians have, you know, they need to defeat Putin, and the Ukrainians are going to defeat, if anyone is going to defeat Putin for them, it is the Ukrainians. So they are, you know, escalating in terms of providing more serious equipment to enable the Ukrainians to beat the Russians. And Russia probably will, you know, have to escalate as well. You know, this is a really important battle for Putin himself. Can he afford to lose? He's losing big time at the moment. If he loses the battle for Donbass, I'm not sure he can survive in Russia. I mean, everyone says he's untouchable, but, you know, the economic devastation caused by sanctions, the huge numbers of Russian troops that are dying and have died already. I think there's going to be huge consequences at home for Putin. And this battle that we're seeing playing out over the next few weeks, I think, is going to be, you know, enormous for Russia, actually for Europe, for European security and the relationship between, you know, the West and Russia.